And
Hi.
of course...
Yes, we're Kyle and Jackie O, by the way.
Obviously, it's been quite a powerful month or so. We're both a little worn out.
This is the 2009 Aria Hall of Fame.
Of which the Mentals are now officially members, although Greedy's still doing it backstage. 1 down, Johnny, 4 to go.
OK, Dano, time is running on a pace.
That's
Who's
right.
next?
Who's next? Well, that would be for our next inductor to announce, mate.
And who have you got in mind to be the next inductor?
Well, a man who himself has gained a Guernsey into the Aria Hall of Fame.
Oh, I think I know who you mean.
Yeah.
The very cuddly, the very wonderful, the very lovely...
Mr. Richard Clapton.
Good evening. When Gough Whitlam came into power in 1972, I thought that was as good a time as any for me to return to Australia, because I'd been in Europe for about 6 years. In those days, the digital world didn't really exist at all, so I had no idea how the Australian music scene was faring. But in Melbourne, there was this real scene happening, and I hooked up with this posse of Melbourne musos through a common love of the great songwriters of the day. And this influence was having an impact, and a real metamorphosis was beginning to take shape, and the embryo of a real Australian music subculture was born. When I first heard the Dingoes, I was blown out by their unique approach to their music, their great musicianship, the unique rhythmic quality of their performance, but most importantly, their songs. These are songs that spoke of Australia rather than other foreign lands. I remember the first Dingoes gig I ever saw at the legendary Station Hotel in Pran. I like most... See, did I say that right? Like most of the rest... Stop it! Like the rest of the audience, I remember being swept up by the passion and the panache and the presence of this great new band. So I soon joined that loose posse of kindred spirits and became part of what arguably was this golden age of Oz rock. There used to be this big old house in Kew where Chris Stockley lived with a couple of the boys from Ariel, I mean. And we could party for days and nights, as you know, and play music very loudly. As Jack Black said in School of Rock, this was the real shit. And this was when rock music really stood for something. The Dingoes' debut album was chock full of great songs. Boy on the Run, Payday Again, Come On Down, and Way Out West. And yet, they dared to come up to Sydney, they toured to packed houses, and they stole all our women. Then they even had the nerve to write a song called Sydney Ladies. Yeah, boys. By the way, who is that on the start of that track? Somebody tell me. Look, in the 70s, it was hard to get noticed outside of your own town, let alone overseas. But news of the band travelled, and before long, America beckoned the band. The Dingoes relocated to California and recorded 5 Times the Sun. Then they spent 2 years touring the States. But like so many bands in the 70s and 80s, the lure and pitfalls of launching a career in the States was pretty much like a salmon swimming upstream. They returned to Australia, and Broderick formed Big Combo. Chris joined Jimmy Barnes' touring band, and Karen played with me for a couple of years. After which, Karen then returned to the US, and amongst other things, he wrote the hit song All Fired Up for Pat Benatar. Dingo's legendary drummer, the late, great John Lee, also played with me for a couple of years in the mid-80s, and he had the most unique style on and off the stage. I used to love the way he used to count the songs in. Back, 2, 3, 4, because he's a backbeat drummer. So, what I remember is one night after a gig, John and I walked into the notorious Benny's Bar in Potts Point in Sydney, where my very good friends In Excess were holding court. When I introduced and explained who John was as the Dingoes' drummer, the whole band jumped up on their feet, fell to their knees and hollered, "We're not worthy, we're not worthy." And such was the respect the Dingoes had with their peers. Some artists leave a legacy that is obvious. Hit singles, huge charts, high profile, and the mandatory trip to rehab. Other artists leave a far more profound legacy, and that is the respect of their peers. Jimmy Barnes and so many other Australian musos quite rightly regard the Dingoes as being the true originators and innovators of contemporary Oz rock. So on behalf of all my mates, I'm so privileged to stand here tonight and present to you the Dingoes.
The Dingoes were one of Australia's first supergroups. As their name implied, they added a refreshing Australian character to rock, blues, country and rhythm and blues.
I've been playing blues since 1962, you know, it was at school. Originally I hated rock and roll, but I hadn't heard any black bands. Then I heard the Drifters, which completely changed my ideas.
The Dingoes gravitated together in Melbourne in 1973 and were one of the first signings to Michael Gudinski's Mushroom Records. 1974 saw them release their award-winning debut self-titled album, which received great critical acclaim and featured songs that have become classic rock staples.
We had a really good following, a really good, loyal following in Australia.
Way out west, where the rain don't fall.
In 1977, the Rolling Stones and Lynyrd Skynyrd's tour manager, Peter Rudge, took the band to the US, where they toured 40 states by road, playing shows including the Roxy in LA.
We generally live in a mobile home, and we wander America and selling pegs from door to door.
And they also recorded their second album in the San Francisco area.
It was originally called Like Sands Through an Hourglass, but that was already used, so we eventually called it 5 Times the Sun.
A year later, the Dingoes were scheduled to tour the US, playing concerts with southern roots rockers Lynyrd Skynyrd, until a plane crash killed the tour and 3 members of Lynyrd Skynyrd, which meant management lost focus on the Dingoes.
There won't be any smooth sailing now.
After that, with a changed lineup, the Dingoes relocated to Woodstock and recorded their third album, Orphans of the Storm, in New York City. By the time that was released in Australia in 1979, the Dingoes had broken up, but not before they'd been locked into the DNA of Australian rock music history.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed an honour to induct the Dingoes into the Aria Hall of Fame.